On July 28, 2015, Cartoon Network aired an episode of Teen Titans Go, titled The Return of Slade. The villain in the title never appeared. Robin announced his return in the opening 60 seconds. The Titans left the tower to confront him, and then the camera stayed behind. The next 11 minutes were about a birthday clown. The clown was a stand-in for the audience. In interviews afterward, the producers said so out loud. That was not even close to the worst thing this show has done to the people who used to watch it. There are 10 of these episodes, stunts, schedules, public statements. Each one cost the show fans. Some got petitions, some got pulled from the air, some are still cited, almost a decade later, as the reason a generation of viewers turned on a children's cartoon they used to love. They will be covered in order, oldest first, starting 2 years before that clown ever showed up. The first of them is the launch itself, or rather, what the launch killed. In the summer of 2012, Cartoon Network announced a new animated series called Teen Titans Go, set to premiere as part of its DC Nation block in 2013. To anyone who had loved the original Teen Titans, which had aired on Cartoon Network from July 19, 2003 to January 16, 2006, the announcement read at first like good news. The show people had spent 6 years grieving was coming back. Same characters, same voice cast. Even the same name, lifted directly from the comic book tie-in series that the original cartoon had inspired. For about an afternoon, on forums and on the early version of Tumblr where the original Teen Titans fandom had migrated, people thought they were getting the 6th season they had been asking for since the cliffhanger ending of Things Change. Before we go further, a quick note: if long-form essays like this one are why you came here, subscribing is the single most useful thing you can do to keep them coming. It costs nothing. Now, back to the launch. If you grew up on the original show, you remember the ending. Things Change was the final half-hour episode of Season 5. It aired on Monday, January 16th, 2006. The episode follows Beast Boy through a jump city that has been quietly altered while he was away. He sees a girl who looks identical to Tara, the team's former member who had sacrificed herself in a previous season finale by turning herself into stone to save the city. The girl, in this episode, has no memory of him. She does not respond to her name. She walks past him into a high school. He waits outside. He looks at her one more time. The episode ends with a freeze frame and the title card. There is no resolution. The producers of the original show, Glenn Murakami and David Slack, have said in subsequent interviews that the ending was deliberately ambiguous, but that ambiguity was supposed to be resolved in a 6th season that never came. The follow-up film, Trouble in Tokyo, which premiered as a Cartoon Network television movie on September 15, 2006, took the team to Japan to fight a villain named Brushagun, ended with Robin and Starfire finally kissing on the Tokyo skyline, and did nothing to resolve the Beast Boy and Tara cliffhanger. That was, until 2013, the last word. If you waited 7 years for that resolution, you waited because of how rare the original show had been on cable in 2006. The original Teen Titans was an action drama with anime influence, voiced by an ensemble cast including Scott Menville as Robin, Hynden Walsh as Starfire, Tara Strong as Raven, Greg Sipes as Beast Boy, and Kari Payton as Cyborg. The show was nominated for 3 Annie Awards across its run. It built one of the earliest animation fandoms on early social media. It introduced characters and tonal beats that in 2003 were rare in American children's animation. The team's emotional weight, the structured arcs around villains like Slade and Trigon, the genuine character development of Raven discovering her inheritance, and Robin grappling with his identity outside Batman's shadow, made the show feel, to a generation of viewers, like the kind of cartoon that respected them. It ended with a cliffhanger and disappeared. What came next, on Cartoon Network's DC Nation block in 2011 and 2012, was a series of 1-minute animated shorts called New Teen Titans. These shorts, produced by Warner Bros. Animation under executive producer Sam Register, used the original character designs in a chibi style and presented the Titans in short comedic vignettes. The shorts were essentially the seed for what would become Teen Titans Go. They were, to fans of the original, a complicated signal. On one hand, the original characters were back in something resembling animated form, voiced by the same cast. On the other hand, they were now appearing in slapstick 1-minute gags rather than in any continuation of the original story. The shorts were popular enough that by mid-2012, Cartoon Network announced that the format would be expanded into a full series. That series was Teen Titans Go. If you were following the news that summer, you saw the announcement and you saw what it was. It was not a continuation, it was not a 6th season, it was not even a return to the original tone. It was an extension of the chibi shorts. It was, by Sam Register's own framing in earlier interviews, about the original series aimed at younger children who had not been the primary audience for the 2003 show. The original audience, the audience that had grown up with the show, was now, in 2013, in their late teens and early 20s. They were not the target. They had never been the target. The original show had ended on a cliffhanger. The final half-hour episode, Things Change, aired on January 16, 2006, and left Beast Boy chasing the ghost of Terra, who appeared to have returned with no memory of who she was or what she had done. The series finale movie, Trouble in Tokyo, aired on September 15, 2006, and resolved nothing about that thread. There was no sixth season. There has never been a sixth season. The crew has talked in fragments across the years about declining toy sales and shifting network priorities, but no clean reason was ever given. The show ended, and the fans waited. 7 years later, what they got was not what they had been waiting for. Teen Titans Go was developed by Aaron Horvath, who had come to Cartoon Network from the sketch series Mad, and Michael Jelinek, who had previously co-helmed the network's Thundercats reboot and worked on Batman the Brave and the Bold. The two were paired deliberately. Jelinek was the DC veteran. Horvath, in Jelinek's own words from a contemporary interview, had no loyalty to the old shows. The network wanted that. They wanted the people running the new Teen Titans cartoon to feel no obligation to the old one. The format was the giveaway. Teen Titans Go would not be a serialized action drama, which is what the original had been. It would be a series of 11-minute comedy shorts paired into half-hour blocks with no continuing arcs, no continuity to the original series, and no interest in recreating its tone. Aaron Horvath, in a Comic Book Resources interview at the 2012 San Diego Comic-Con, described the new setting as a super high-tech, expensive apartment that the Titans just litter with their stuff. Robin would no longer be the steady, infallible leader of the original show. He would be, in Jelinek's phrasing, the fool. He would think he was always right and almost always be wrong. The only fights, Jelinek said, would be over who got first dibs on the kitchen. The pairing of Horvath and Jelinek was, in industry terms, a clean strategic choice. Jelinek understood the property well enough to keep the new show from straying into territory that DC's licensing department would object to. Horvath had the comedic instincts that the new format required, including the rapid-fire pacing and the cultural reference-heavy writing room voice that had characterized Mad. The two worked together on paper like a bonded pair built for a specific job. Their job was to take a previously serious children's network property and convert it into an 11-minute comedy. They executed the conversion. The execution was, by industry standards, professional. The execution did not in any meaningful way take the original show's audience into account, because the original show's audience was not, by network determination, the audience for the new show. The audience for the new show was younger. The audience that mourned the original was, in the casting of the new creative leadership, simply not in the room. Their absence was the loudest thing about the production. The new showrunners had been chosen specifically not to be the kind of writers who would be loyal to the old fans, because loyalty to the old fans was not what the network was buying. This was already going to be a problem for fans, who had come for the action. The bigger problem was what the new show would replace. The DC Nation block on Cartoon Network was, by 2012 and into early 2013, one of the most respected animation programming hours on cable. It carried two action dramas that fans of serious superhero storytelling had built communities around. The first was Young Justice, an ensemble teen team series developed by Greg Weisman and Brandon Vietti, which had premiered in 2010 and which followed a sidekick group through a complex multi-season arc involving alien conspiracies, identity crises, and morally complicated mentorship. The second was Green Lantern, the animated series, a CGI show that had taken a darker, more space operatic angle on the Hal Jordan mythos. Both shows had earned critical praise, both had small but devoted fan bases. Both were canceled in 2013, with little to no advance warning to viewers, and the rumored explanation, which Cartoon Network never officially confirmed, but which became the consensus version of events on every fan forum, was that DC's parent company felt the lack of humor in those shows was no longer appealing to kids. The DC Nation block, in its short 2-year run from 2012 to 2014, had become for older animation fans what specific HBO programming hours had become for prestige drama fans a decade earlier. It was an appointment viewing window. The block had been promoted, when it launched, as a deliberate showcase for serious DC animation. It carried short interstitial content called DC Nation Shorts, which were standalone animated pieces featuring various DC properties, often by experimental animators given creative freedom. Some of the shorts, including a series of new Teen Titans shorts in the original 2003 animation style by Sam Register, had been minor cult favorites. The block had been a curatorial achievement for the network. Its dismantling in 2013 was not a small loss. It was the dismantling of a programming initiative that had taken years to assemble and that had carried the network's broader credibility with the older animation fan audience for the previous several years. Teen Titans Go premiered on April 23, 2013 at 7:30 in the evening Eastern Time. On Cartoon Network, Beware the Batman, another DC Nation series that would be canceled within a year, premiered alongside it. Within months, both Young Justice and Green Lantern were gone. By 2015, the entire DC Nation block had effectively been discontinued, with the only remaining DC content on Cartoon Network being Teen Titans Go itself. The reaction from the older fan community was immediate and bitter. Two cherished, story-heavy, character-driven action series had been replaced by an 11-minute comedy whose entire premise seemed to be that the original characters had been replaced with cartoon imitations of themselves who shouted, made farting noises, and refused to take anything seriously. The grief was not really about the new show. The grief was about what was no longer on the air. If you were watching DC Nation in those final months, you saw it disappear in pieces. By 2014, the block was being preempted for things like the high-definition remaster of the first Pokemon film. By 2015, the only remaining DC Nation content was the new Teen Titans shorts themselves, which were now being aired exclusively as filler during Teen Titans Go blocks. The container that had held some of the most ambitious DC animation in 20 years was now being used as a delivery mechanism for the show that had displaced its other tenants. Online petitions began circulating almost immediately. The first major one, hosted on the petition site change.org, was titled simply "Cancel Teen Titans Go and Bring Back the Original." It collected several hundred supporters across 2013 and 2014 and would, eventually, be joined by dozens of similar petitions across the next decade, none of which would have any effect on the network's decisions. The producers were aware of this from the start. At WonderCon 2013, just before the show premiered, Michael Jelenic told an interviewer something that has been circulated and recirculated among critics of the show ever since. "They hate the show right now," he said, "but when they see it, they will probably hate it a little more. And then they will see 4 episodes and they will say, it's not that bad. And in 5 years, when it's canceled, they will love it. The same people who want to punch us in the face," he added, "will want to save the show one day." Aaron Horvath, in the same interview, admitted that they were terrified of what the hardcore fan base was going to think. They were not wrong to be. The contempt this exchange gestured toward, the rolling of the eyes at the old fans before the new show had even aired, set the tone for everything that came after. It was the position the producers would defend for years. The original audience was not the audience. The old fans were not the priority. The new show was a children's program for younger kids who had not seen the original, and if those younger kids liked it, the rest of the complaints did not matter. Sam Register, the Cartoon Network and Warner Bros. Animation vice president who oversaw both the original Teen Titans and Teen Titans Go, had said something close to this in defense of the original show 10 years earlier. He said the goal was making a good superhero show for kids, and if the older comic book fans happened to like it, that was great, but it was not the mission. By 2013, that philosophy was being applied to a show that was openly the replacement for 2 action series, and applied to a fan base that had spent 7 years waiting for a 6th season that was no longer coming. If you watched the premiere episode, called Legendary Sandwich, on April 23, 2013, you watched the Teen Titans, voiced by their original actors, in their original costumes, on a quest to construct the perfect sandwich. The episode is about a sandwich. The story arc, such as it is, involves the Titans gathering ingredients and arguing about toppings. There is no Slade, there is no Trigon, there is no consequence. The episode ends with the sandwich being eaten. The audience that had spent 7 years asking what happened to Tara was now being shown, on the same network, on the slot that had until recently held Young Justice, an episode about lunch. The voice cast was the part that hurt the most. Greg Cipes, returning as Beast Boy, Hynden Walch, returning as Starfire, Kari Payton, returning as Robin, Tara Strong, returning as Raven. The same 5 actors who had voiced the team across 5 seasons of the original were back, now voicing a comedic version of the same characters. The familiarity of the voices in the trailers made the new show sound like a continuation of the old one. Some viewers in the lead up to the premiere hoped that the new show would resolve the cliffhangers of the old one. The voices suggested continuity. The premise, when it became clear, did not. The new show was using the same cast in a comedic register that explicitly refused continuity. The familiarity of the voices, which could have been a gift to the older audience, instead became the mechanism of the betrayal. The familiar voices were now saying things the original Titans would never have said. The familiar voices were now arguing about a sandwich. The defenders of the new show argue, fairly, that none of this was the new show's fault. Teen Titans Go did not cancel Young Justice. Teen Titans Go did not refuse to make a 6th season of the original. Network decisions are network decisions, and blaming a kid's comedy for a programming choice made above its head is misplaced anger. The argument is correct on its face. The problem was not really that the new show existed. The problem was that the new show almost immediately started making episodes about how the people angry at its existence were idiots for being angry. It positioned itself from very early on as a show that could not separate criticism of network decisions from criticism of itself, and that responded to both by mocking the people doing the criticizing. The pattern would crystallize quickly. The first explicit example of it was a crossover episode that would air less than 2 years after the show premiered. And that brought back in Cameo, the very show that Teen Titans Go had quietly helped to bury. That episode was Let's Get Serious. It aired on February 26, 2015, as the 32nd episode of Season 2 and the 84th overall episode of the series. It was directed by Peter Rita Mihail and written by Michael Jelenic and Aaron Horvath, the showrunners. It is the second of the 10 things to be covered, and the first of what the production crew themselves, in later interviews, would come to refer to as the hater episodes. The premise of Let's Get Serious is straightforward. The Titans are out fighting the HIV-E5, behaving with their usual chaotic incompetence, when 3 members of the Young Justice team, Aqualad, Superboy, and Miss Martian, fly in and dispatch the villains efficiently in seconds. The Young Justice team criticizes the Titans for being silly. Robin, stung, decides the team needs to become serious. They put on grim faces, mention their dead parents in monotone, and try to be the kind of brooding, joyless heroes that the kind of show their critics want them to be. It does not go well. By the end of the episode, the Titans abandon the experiment, embrace their silliness, and the moral lands as something like, "This is what we are, and there is nothing wrong with what we are." The choice to bring Young Justice back was not subtle. Aqualad, the only Young Justice character given a speaking role in the episode, was voiced by Khary Payton, who voices Cyborg in Teen Titans Go, and who had also voiced Aqualad in the original Young Justice. The Young Justice voice actors had not been brought back as a set. Khary Payton was simply pulling double duty, voicing his Teen Titans Go role and his Young Justice role on the same day, in the same episode. That was using the comparatively underused Young Justice characters as a way to lecture the audience about their own complaints. There was a producer cameo. The man laughing at Raven's stand-up comedy routine was a likeness of Michael Jelenic himself, drawn in by the storyboard artist Peter Rita Mihail, because Jelenic wanted Raven's bit to go on and on and on. If you remember Young Justice, you remember why its absence was felt so heavily. The show, developed by Greg Weisman and Brandon Vietti, had run for 2 seasons before being canceled in 2013. The cancellation, by most contemporary accounts, came down to toy sales. Mattel, which held the toy license, withdrew its support after determining that the show's young adult skewing audience was not buying enough merchandise. Without toy revenue, the show could not justify its production budget. By the time Teen Titans Go premiered, Young Justice was gone, and would remain gone for 6 years, until DC Universe revived it in 2019 as Young Justice Outsiders. The fans who had loved that show, who had run online petitions to save it, who had organized buying campaigns for the merchandise that did exist, watched their show die and watched it replaced by what they perceived to be a children's comedy that mocked the kind of thing they had loved. When Aqualad, in Let's Get Serious, was used as a mouthpiece for those fans' criticism, and then defeated narratively, the message landed exactly as intended. The most quoted line of the episode comes from Aqualad, who at one point looks at the camera, addresses the Titans directly, and tells Robin, "You are a mockery of everything the world holds sacred about heroes." The line was meant to land as parody. It was a deliberate satire of the kind of complaint the producers had been seeing in their feeds and message inboxes for 2 years. In a follow-up interview with the website Comics Alliance, Michael Jelenic explained that the episode had grown out of responding to what he called internet hate. Fans wanted the show to be more serious. The crossover, he said, was an attempt to imagine what a more serious version of the show would look like. In their voice, bringing in Young Justice felt natural, because that was the show their show was always being compared to. If you watch the rest of the episode, you watch the Titans try to comply. They put on dark, serious faces, modeled in the episode's animation on Major Motoko Kusanagi from the manga and anime series Ghost in the Shell, and walk around Titan's tower being grim. Robin, in the most quoted scene, mentions for the first and only time in the entire series that his parents are dead. The line lands in monotone. The other Titans look at him with discomfort. The joke is that the only way for the show to become more serious, by the producers' framing, is to do the dramatic darkness equivalent of what their critics keep asking for, which the producers consider absurd. The result, in the episode, is that the Titans are no longer themselves, no longer fun, no longer interesting, and the team has to abandon the experiment to be functional again. The closing musical number is called Let's Get Serious, sung by Robin in his serious mode voice, with chorus lines about how seriousness is the only path forward. While the visuals undercut every line, reasonable people can read Let's Get Serious as good-natured self-awareness. The show was not the original. It was never going to be the original. The producers were tired of being told they were obligated to make something they had never been hired to make. There is a generosity in that reading. There is also a dismissiveness in it that the reading tends to overlook. If you give the producers maximum benefit of the doubt, the episode reads as a comic apology, in which the show concedes that it understands the complaint, performs the alternative the complaint is calling for, demonstrates that the alternative would also have problems, and then declines to make the alternative. That reading has internal coherence. It is, if you accept it, an honest negotiation between the show and its critics, conducted in the only register the show knows how to use, which is comedy. The problem with that reading is that the negotiation is one-sided. The complaint, as performed by Aqualad, is a strawman version of what the actual complaint was. The complaint, as written by the actual older fans, was not that the show was an active replacement for shows that had been canceled, that the replacement was being used as a vehicle to mock the audience of the canceled shows, and that the network had no interest in reversing any part of that arrangement. The kindest reading available, in other words, was still a reading in which the show was talking past its own critics on purpose. The defining feature of Let's Get Serious is not its self-awareness. It is the way the episode frames every complaint about the show as a request for it to be more like Young Justice, and then mocks that request. The complaints from the original Teen Titans audience were not really that the new show was not Young Justice. They were that the new show was not the show those fans had spent 5 years watching. The complaints from the Young Justice audience were not that they wanted the new show to be Young Justice. They were that Young Justice had been canceled and that this new show had been a contributing factor in why. By collapsing both of those critiques into a straw man of the brooding, gritty, dead parents superhero show, the episode managed to make the act of being upset look ridiculous. It did not address the actual grievance. It rewrote the grievance into something easier to laugh at, and then it laughed at it. The producers of Young Justice, Greg Weisman and Brandon Vietti, were not consulted on the episode. In a later interview, Michael Jelenic was careful to frame their use of the Young Justice characters as borrowing, not satirizing the show itself. "We would not even fool ourselves to think that we could pick up that mantle," he said, "and do what they do as well as they do. The characters were used to poke fun at our show," he said. "To take the show that's really respected for doing serious superheroes really well and have those characters mock our show for not being that. More than anything," he said, "we used them for that." The honesty of that admission is part of what makes the episode hard to read as benign. The producers knew the Young Justice characters were not really the point. They were a costume the criticism of Teen Titans Go could be hung on. By making Aqualad the mouthpiece of the complaint, the show could deliver the complaint, deflate it, and walk away whistling, all without ever directly engaging with what the actual complaint had been. If you go back and watch the episode now, knowing the context, you can see the strain in it. The episode is built to convince you that you, the older critic, are being heard. It contains, embedded in its structure, the thing you wanted to say. It puts the thing in Aqualad's mouth, makes Aqualad an authoritative figure visually borrowed from the show you preferred, and then has Aqualad lose. You watch yourself be dismissed by a character voiced by the same actor who voices the cartoon Cyborg. The trick of the episode, when you see it, is hard to unsee. The pattern that Let's Get Serious established became the template for the next several seasons. The producers had identified by early 2015 that there was a vocal contingent of older viewers who hated the show, and that those viewers were generating a steady stream of online noise, including petitions, hate threads, and reaction videos. The decision they made was not to ignore this contingent. The decision was to write episodes about them, but to write those episodes in a way that handed those viewers the punchline by handing it back to them upside down. Let's Get Serious was the first attempt. It was light. It was, by the producer's standards, kind. The next attempt, 5 months later, would not be light or kind, and would arguably be the single most resented episode the show ever produced. The Young Justice cancellation, which Let's Get Serious gestured toward without acknowledging, deserves a separate accounting because it provided the emotional underpinning of the older audience's complaint. Young Justice had been canceled by Cartoon Network in early 2013, after 2 seasons with no warning to the audience and no closure to its central arc. The cancellation, according to multiple subsequent interviews with the showrunners Greg Weisman and Brandon Vietti, was attributed to disappointing toy sales for Mattel, which had been the show's licensing partner. The toys, designed for older boys, had not sold well. The girl viewers who watched the show, who were by all accounts a substantial part of the audience, were not the demographic Mattel had been aiming for. The show was successful in viewership and in critical reception. The toys did not move. The toys in cable network economics were the metric. The show ended. That story, the cancellation by toy sales metric, was widely known in the older fan community by 2015. When Let's Get Serious imported Aqualad and Miss Martian and Superboy as the visiting authority figures who criticized the Titans for not being serious enough, the older audience watching saw 3 characters from a show that had been canceled because their toys did not sell, being used to lecture the audience of the show that had replaced them. The frame, however well-intentioned, could not escape that subtext. The episode was using the corpse of one show to defend the existence of the show that had taken its slot. The producers may not have intended that reading. The reading was inescapable for anyone who knew the production history. That episode is the 3rd one to be covered. It is The Return of Slade. It aired on July 28, 2015 as the 50th episode of the 2nd season and the 102nd overall episode of the series. The setup, again, is straightforward. The episode opens with Robin bursting through the wall of Titan's Tower to announce that Slade, the show's most iconic villain, returned. The other Titans, who have been doing nothing of consequence, are reluctant to engage. Cyborg suggests calling the police. Starfire reminds Robin that the emergency number is the 9, the 1, and the 1, in that order. Robin insists they go. The screen does not show the fight. A title card or a voiceover indicates that Slade has been defeated in 3 episodes and a made-for-television movie, with drama, action, humor, and a kiss between Robin and Starfire, none of which has been shown. The reference is impossible to miss. The original Teen Titans had built its 2nd season around Slade, who appeared across multiple episodes and was eventually defeated in an arc that included drama, action, comedy, and a Robin and Starfire kiss in the Trouble in Tokyo movie. Teen Titans Go, in this opening, is acknowledging the entire original Slade arc by gesturing at it, condensing it into a sentence, refusing to show any of it, and then moving on. The rest of the episode is about a clown. Beast Boy and Cyborg insist on hiring a birthday clown to celebrate the off-screen victory. Raven repeatedly tells them that clowns are for children. The clown they hire is unimpressive. Beast Boy and Cyborg, dissatisfied, decide to update the clown, making him cooler, edgier, more violent, more interesting, more in line with how they remember loving clowns from when they were younger. The updated clown becomes a city-destroying menace. The Titans defeat him. Raven's lesson, repeated multiple times across the episode, is that clowns are meant for children, that Beast Boy and Cyborg are too old for them, and that the entire problem was caused by their refusal to let go of something they had outgrown. If you watch the transformation scene, you watch Beast Boy and Cyborg, dressed in lab coats and rubber gloves, in a sequence visually modeled on Dexter's laboratory, inject the clown with a serum that the episode calls Titan, in a clear visual reference to the Joker in the video game Batman Arkham Asylum, who is similarly empowered by an injected substance also called Titan. The clown grows in size, sprouts muscles, develops a deeper voice, and starts attacking the city. The metaphor of fans demanding a darker version of a children's character and getting in return something dangerous and harmful is now visible at the molecular level of the episode. The producers were not hiding what they meant. They were stacking the visual metaphor. The metaphor was not concealed. In a later interview, Michael Jelenic described the episode in his own words. The pitch, he said, was an episode about how people look at comic characters. People grow up with those characters, then they are 40 years old, and they still want to be marketed to with the same characters that were meant for them as children, because they have not moved on to other things. Which is fine, he said, but they degrade children-based things. So the episode was going to be about that, but using clowns instead. Cyborg and Beast Boy remember that they really like clowns. The clown was the original Teen Titans audience. The hiring of the clown was the act of expecting Teen Titans Go to recapture the older show. The updating of the clown into something dark and dangerous was, in the producer's framing, what those older fans were asking for when they asked for the show to be more like its predecessor. The lesson of the episode that Beast Boy and Cyborg should let go of their love for the clown because the clown is meant for children and they should have outgrown it was the lesson the producers wanted the older audience to learn. Stop watching this show, it is not for you. You are too old, you should have moved on by now. If you watch the episode now, with the metaphor visible, the staging of certain scenes takes on a different weight. The moment when Beast Boy and Cyborg are pleading with the clown to be cooler, asking him to do something edgier than the standard kiddie routines, is the moment when the show is staging, on screen, what the producers believe their older audience has been doing for 2 years. The moment when the clown becomes dangerous, after the injection, is the show's argument about what would happen if those demands were granted. The moment when Raven scolds Beast Boy and Cyborg for not letting go of their childhood attachments is the show's direct address to the older audience. None of this was subtext. The subtext, by the show's standards, had been in the previous Hater episode. The Return of Slade was the text. The text, when watched in 2015 by anyone who recognized the metaphor, played as a 4-minute lecture repeated 3 times across an 11-minute episode on why the older audience should stop watching. The audience that recognized the metaphor was, of course, the audience the lecture was aimed at. The audience that did not recognize the metaphor, which was most of the show's actual demographic, watched a perfectly serviceable comedy episode about a birthday clown. The reaction was severe. The episode was called The Return of Slade. It was promoted with imagery of Slade. Anyone who had loved the original Teen Titans, the show on which Slade had been arguably the most carefully built villain in the entire run, was likely to tune in. They were the target audience for the episode. They tuned in, sat through the cold open, watched the camera abandon the fight, and then realized slowly that the next 11 minutes were going to be about how the writers thought they were pathetic for tuning in. If you remember the original Slade, you remember why the misdirection was so cruel. Slade, voiced by Ron Perlman in the 2003 series, was the central antagonist of seasons 1 and 2. The arc with Slade was, by widespread fan consensus, one of the strongest extended villain stories in early 2000s American animation. Slade manipulated Robin into becoming his apprentice. Slade gave Tara a path into the team and then revealed her as a spy. Slade physically tormented the Titans across multi-episode arcs. The defeat of Slade in the season 2 finale, when Tara sacrificed herself by turning to stone, was one of the emotional centerpieces of the entire series. To anyone who had watched that arc unfold, the suggestion that the Teen Titans had defeated Slade in 3 episodes and a made-for-television movie was not nothing. It was a nod to a story they knew by heart. The skipping of that nod, the refusal to show it, was a calibrated decision by the producers to acknowledge that the older audience knew exactly what was being referenced, and to deny that audience the satisfaction of seeing it. The episode currently sits at one of the lowest rated user scores of any episode of Teen Titans Go on the Internet Movie Database. Reviews on the page describe it as a ratings trap, a middle finger, evil, unforgivable. The fan wiki itself, normally protective of the show, describes The Return of Slade as among the most hated episodes by both fans of the original 2003 series and fans of Teen Titans Go. The score, last visible on the public page, was 3.1 out of 10, well below the show's typical episode score of around 6. The user reviews on that page contain hundreds of variations of the same observation, namely, that the episode was specifically constructed to attract older fans of the original show and then mock them for being older fans of the original show. Even some viewers who had defended Teen Titans Go up to that point were thrown by The Return of Slade. The episode took the producer's philosophy, which had been quietly running through the show for 2 years, and made it text. It put the philosophy into a bottle, shook it, and spilled it onto the audience. The message was clear and, depending on your reading, either honest or cruel. The message was, you are not the audience for this show. You will never be the audience for this show. We do not care if you stop watching. In fact, we would prefer it. What is striking, watching The Return of Slade now, is the deliberate quality of the misdirection. Other episodes of Teen Titans Go have misleading titles. The fan wiki has lists of them. Some, like Breakfast Cheese, are named after offhand lines and have nothing to do with the plot. Those are forgivable. They are accidents of the 11-minute format. The Return of Slade is not an accident. The first 60 seconds of the episode are constructed to make any viewer who tuned in for Slade believe they are about to watch a Slade episode. Robin's announcement is dramatic. The team mobilization is real. The villain's mask appears. The episode is, by its own internal logic, about to be about Slade. And then it deliberately is not. That deliberateness was the part that the older audience could not forgive. Other Hater episodes had been jokes. The Return of Slade was an ambush. It was an episode that knew exactly which audience it was going to attract, attracted them, and then spent 11 minutes telling them they were stupid for showing up. If you were that audience, you watched yourself be lured into a room and laughed at, there is, in cartoon history, no other episode of any major network animated series that has done this quite as openly. In the end, Slade did appear in Teen Titans Go. He was given a real role in the 2018 theatrical film Teen Titans Go. To the movies, voiced by Will Arnett, who also produced. The character was finally allowed to be funny, threatening, and visible. The choice was clearly a course correction. The producers had received the message from the return of Slade. They had heard at scale that the joke had not landed. Whether or not they regretted the joke is impossible to know. They never publicly apologized for the episode. But they did eventually give the audience the version of Slade that the original show had taught those viewers to want. It took 3 more years. It took a feature film, the return of Slade itself. The 2015 episode has never been recut, never been re-edited, and is still on streaming, still on syndication, still available, still mocked, still referenced in every list of the worst episodes the show has ever produced. The fourth controversy is, in a strange way, the producers' attempt to address that backlash directly. It did not go better. The episode is The Fourth Wall. It aired on October 20th, 2015, as the 9th episode of the 3rd season and the 113th overall episode of the series. The premise is meta to the point of being recursive. The villain, Control Freak, a character who began life in the original 2003 Teen Titans as a couch potato fanboy obsessed with controlling television, returns to inform the Titans that they are characters on a TV show that he has created. Their continued existence depends on him. He criticizes them for being lowbrow. He shows them clips of the original Teen Titans, which they binge watch and then complain about, asking why they did not get a 6th season and why their show was canceled. He threatens to reboot them if they do not improve. The Titans attempt to improve by becoming highbrow, switching to a different animation style, and acting more sophisticated. By the time they are done improving, Control Freak admits that he no longer needs to reboot them, because they have already rebooted themselves. The Titans, in the end, return to their original style by farting at Control Freak. They break the fourth wall by literally cracking the screen the audience is watching them through, in order to escape Control Freak's broadcast. If the return of Slade was a slap to the audience, the fourth wall is a wink at the audience. The producers had clearly registered that the previous summer's backlash had been intense. They wanted to address it. The way they chose to address it was to make an entire episode about how their critics, like Control Freak, want to reboot or ruin the show, and how the Titans, by sticking to their lowbrow identity, will resist that. The Titans, in the climactic moment of the episode, point their backsides at Control Freak and fart out a song, which is what restores them to their original animation. The act of refusing to be highbrow, the act of remaining childishly crude, is what saves them. If you remember the original Teen Titans, you remember Control Freak. He first appeared in Season 3 of the 2003 series, voiced by Alexander Polinsky, as a gleefully hateable couch potato villain whose powers came from his enchanted television remote. The original Control Freak was a parody of the obsessive fan, the kind of viewer who lived for criticizing every detail of his entertainment. The 2003 show used him for comedy, but with affection. Teen Titans Go imported him directly. The same actor, Alexander Polinsky, returned for the new show. Control Freak in Teen Titans Go is essentially the same character, slightly broader, with the same motivations. The choice to make Control Freak the villain of the meta episode that mocks the show's critics is, on the level of casting, almost too clever. The producers built a villain in 2003 who represented the fanboy, brought him back in 2015, and used him in an episode that frames the show's critics as fanboys. The narrative weight of that choice is significant. The producers did not pick a random villain. They picked the villain who, in show internal logic, was already the embodiment of the kind of viewer who complains about cartoons. The episode contains, embedded inside it, an unusual moment of acknowledgement. The Titans, watching clips of the original 2003 Teen Titans, react with a mixture of nostalgia and frustration. They genuinely seem to like the original show. They complain about its cancellation. They ask why they did not get a season 6. The acknowledgement is real. The producers know. They know what was lost. They know why the audience is angry. They have always known. The acknowledgement, when you read the production interviews surrounding the episode, was not accidental. Aaron Horvath and Michael Jelenic had grown up watching superhero animation. They had, by their own admission, been fans of the kind of show the original Teen Titans was. They were not unaware of what had been lost when the 2006 series ended. They were not unaware of why the older audience had spent 7 years asking for a 6th season. The fourth wall was the closest the show ever came to admitting, on screen, that the producers understood the grievance. The line spoken by Cyborg, comparing the original animation style favorably to the current one, was a confession written into the script by writers who agreed with the assessment. The producers were not hiding behind ignorance. They were declining as a creative choice to address the grievance the way the audience wanted, while also declining to pretend that the grievance was illegitimate. The pretense in the episode was not that the original show was bad. The pretense was that any attempt to make the new show better in the ways the audience wanted would, in some structural way, ruin it. The episode presented the choice as a binary: be lowbrow and survive, or be highbrow and end. The audience that wanted a third option, in which the new show could simply have been more careful with its source material's tone while remaining a children's network production, was not being addressed by the binary the episode constructed. But the episode does not stop there. After acknowledging the loss, the episode treats the audience that mourns that loss as though it is control freak. The fans who want a more sophisticated show, who like the original animation style, who would like the Titans to act more like the heroes they were in the 2003 series, are coded into the figure of the villain who is trying to reboot the show against its will. The show defends itself against that figure by farting on him. The act of being lowbrow is presented as a heroic stand. The act of asking for the show to be anything else is presented as villainy. The episode also includes the line delivered by Cyborg while watching the original series that the original is way better than the current show in terms of animation and art style. The line is delivered as a joke. It functions as cover. It allows the writers to acknowledge the criticism inside the script, claim that they have engaged with it, and then proceed to ignore it. Self-deprecation as armor. If you watch the animation reboot scene, the visual joke is that the Titans, in attempting to be highbrow, changed themselves into a different animation style entirely. The new style features rounder faces, simpler features, less detailed backgrounds, in what Beast Boy and Starfire compare to a student-made animation passion project. The implication is that any attempt at sophistication will result in something even worse than the show's actual style. The Titans become, briefly, an even cheaper version of themselves, and the joke is that this is what their critics are asking for. The animators reveal themselves on screen as struggling figures behind computers. The lip sync goes deliberately out of phase with the dialogue. The whole episode is a sustained argument that the show, as it exists, is the version of itself most worth defending. The fourth wall was scheduled, then unscheduled, then rescheduled. According to FanWiki Records, it was originally set to air on October 1st, 2015. It was pulled. It was rescheduled for October 21st, 2015. It was pulled again one day after airing before being made widely available. The reasons have never been officially clarified. The episode currently sits at a 6.0 on IMDb, a noticeably lower score than most other Teen Titans Go episodes from the same season. Many of the user reviews specifically cite the meta-mockery, the pretense of acknowledging the audience while dismissing them, as the reason for their dislike. If you go through the contemporary reaction in the comment threads, under the episode's clips on the Cartoon Network YouTube channel, and on aggregator sites, you find the same observation in dozens of variations. The viewers are not angry that the show defends itself. They are angry that the show pretends to listen. The earlier hater episodes, like The Return of Slade, had not pretended. They had just struck. The fourth wall, by inviting the audience to feel acknowledged before pivoting to the same mockery, was, for many of those commenters, more frustrating than its predecessors. It introduced the genre of the deliberate fake-out apology, in which the show appears to admit to a flaw, says the flaw out loud, and then proceeds to use the admission as a way to refuse to fix the flaw. The episode is, by the show's own internal logic, the third hater episode. The first three were Let's Get Serious, The Return of Slade, and The Fourth Wall. In chronological order, all aired within roughly 8 months of each other across 2015. By the end of that year, the producers had built a recurring genre of episode whose sole purpose was to address, dismiss, and mock the show's critics. There is no equivalent pattern in the history of any other major animated series. Other shows have addressed their critics. South Park does it. The Simpsons does it. None of those shows make the criticism of itself a recurring genre across a calendar year, accumulating 4 such episodes by 2016. Teen Titans Go almost uniquely made hating the haters a recurring formula. The producers were proud of the formula. They told interviewers they were proud of it. The audience, in equal volume, hated the formula. By late 2015, the negative feedback loop was self-sustaining. Critics complained. Producers wrote an episode about the critics. Critics complained more. Producers wrote another one. The relationship had stabilized in mutual antagonism, and the show, comfortable in that antagonism, was growing. The closest historical comparison, when fans of animation criticism try to find one, is the Family Guy approach to its critics in the late 2000s, when the show, after its cancellation and revival, regularly produced episodes that mocked the people who had wanted it cancelled. Family Guy's critic mocking, however, was distributed across a longer run, applied to a much wider variety of grievances, and rarely tied to a specific named episode. The Simpsons, in its later seasons, has occasionally made jokes about its own decline, but in a register of resigned self-deprecation rather than active mockery. South Park, in its episode 200 and 201 two-parter, addressed its critics in a way that was more focused on the threat of censorship than on individual fan complaints. None of these examples produced in a single calendar year 4 named episodes whose entire purpose was to mock the show's critics. The Teen Titans Go cluster is, in animation history, unique. The cluster is unique not because the show was uniquely defensive, but because the show was uniquely committed to the bit. The producers had decided at some point in 2014 that the right response to the older audience's complaints was to reply on screen in the show itself, and to keep replying every few months until the audience either accepted the show or stopped watching. The audience mostly stopped watching. The show mostly kept replying. If you sat through all 4 hater episodes in order, the cumulative experience would resemble watching a person be told 4 times in 8 months that their objection to a thing was the actual problem with the thing. The first time, you might shrug. The second time, you might feel insulted. The third time, you might feel angry. The fourth time, you would either stop watching or commit to a long-term resentment of the show. The viewers who stopped watching are, by definition, no longer in the audience. The viewers who committed to the resentment are the population whose long-running complaints about the show, on YouTube and in comment sections and in long-form fan community posts, have shaped the show's reputation in animation discourse for the past decade. The fourth wall, more than any of the other hater episodes, is the episode that turned the older audience's frustration into commitment. The earlier episodes had just been insults. The fourth wall had been an insult that pretended briefly to be a conversation, and that pretense was what the older audience could not forgive. The fifth thing to be covered is not really an episode. It is a coincidence of timing that the show could not control, but that it also did not handle especially well. On the evening of November 13, 2015, 3 coordinated terror attacks were carried out in Paris. A series of suicide bombings at the Stade de France Stadium and mass shootings at the Bataclan Theater, and at restaurants and cafes in the 10th and 11th arrondissements killed 130 people. The attacks were one of the worst terror events in European post-war history. They began at around 9:20 in the evening Paris time and spanned several hours into the early morning of November 14th. If you remember that Friday night, you remember how the news cycle handled it. Networks across the globe interrupted programming to cover the unfolding events. By Saturday morning, every major American news channel was running continuous live coverage. Entertainment networks, including Cartoon Network, were forced to make immediate decisions about what content was appropriate to air in the hours and days following the attacks. The standard industry practice in such situations is to pull any content that, by mood or premise, could be perceived as in poor taste, even if no direct connection to the events exists. The standard is not new. It dates back at least to the September 11th, 2001 attacks, after which a list of films, music videos, and television episodes were temporarily pulled from rotation by their networks. The Coca-Cola company changed an entire ad campaign. Several films had release dates pushed back. The convention is that in the immediate aftermath of mass casualty events, entertainment networks err on the side of restraint. Earlier that same week, Cartoon Network had been airing new episodes of Teen Titans Go in its standard Friday night programming block. One of the episodes scheduled for that week was an episode called Salty Codgers. The plot of Salty Codgers, according to the fan wiki and contemporary recap pieces, involves the Titans dying of old age and Raven confronting the personification of death itself in order to bring her friends back. The plot is, by Teen Titans Go standards, dark. The team, transformed into elderly versions of themselves, expires from natural causes. Raven, terrified of losing them, has to negotiate with death to undo the deaths. The episode was not directly about Paris. It was not about terror or attacks or France or Europe. It was about an absurd cartoon premise that involved deaths played for comic effect. None of it had been written or animated with any awareness of what was about to happen on a Friday night in November. It aired, in some markets, in close proximity to the news cycle reporting the attacks. According to a 2017 retrospective by the entertainment site Looper, Cartoon Network pulled Salty Codgers from its scheduled rotation after the attacks. The decision was not, by all available accounts, that the episode was directly offensive in light of the events. The decision was that, in a week when an audience that included children was being saturated with images of mass casualty events, an animated comedy in which the protagonist died and had to bargain with death was not the tone the network wanted to broadcast. The episode was quietly removed from rotation. It was, eventually, restored to syndication and remains available now, but the immediate move in November 2015 was to pull it. If you are a person who has worked in network programming, you know that pulls like this are routine. They are not announced publicly. They happen quietly. The decisions are made by network programmers in real time, often within hours of the news, and they are reversed after a brief cooling off period. There is nothing controversial in industry terms about what Cartoon Network did with Salty Codgers in November 2015. The 2001 precedent is the relevant historical anchor. After the September 11th attacks, a list of films, episodes, and music videos were pulled from rotation by various networks and studios. The list, which circulated in industry trade publications at the time, included films with imagery of falling buildings, episodes of sitcoms set in the World Trade Center, and music videos that involved planes or skylines that resembled the attacked sites. The Coca-Cola Company changed an entire advertising campaign that featured aerial shots of cities. Several films had release dates pushed back. The Sopranos on HBO redid the opening title sequence to remove a brief shot of the Twin Towers. The convention, established in those weeks, was that in the immediate aftermath of mass casualty events, entertainment networks err on the side of restraint, and that the restraint is usually quiet. The industry handles these moments by acting first and explaining later, if explaining is even necessary. By the time the explanations are offered, the immediate news cycle has often moved on, and the pull has been reversed, without anyone noticing. This is what Cartoon Network did with Salty Codgers. There was no announcement, there was no statement. The episode simply did not air in the rotation that it had been scheduled for, and was returned to syndication later. This is, on the face of it, a small story. Networks pull episodes after disasters all the time. The tradition is older than cable. After the September 11th, 2001 attacks, a list of films, episodes, and music videos were pulled from rotation for similar reasons. The Salty Codgers pull was nothing unusual in itself. What made it a story for Teen Titans Go specifically was the contrast it created with the show's broader pattern. Here was a show that had spent 2 years, by November 2015, building episodes whose entire premise was attacking the people who criticized the show. The producers had no apparent appetite for being told what they could and could not say. The Fourth Wall had aired only weeks earlier. The Return of Slade only a few months before that. And then, in the same season, the show was perfectly willing to pull an episode quietly and without comment when the network decided that an outside event made the content uncomfortable. The lesson the older fan community drew, fairly or not, was that the producers had a tolerance for offense that was selective. They were not interested in the offense their show caused to the audience that had loved the original. They were interested in the offense their show might cause to advertisers and to the network. The Salty Codgers pull was a small footnote, but it became, in fan discourse, an example of the show being capable of restraint when it wanted to be, and being unwilling to apply that restraint to anything related to its own audience. If you put the two events side by side, you see the asymmetry the older fan community wanted you to see. On one side, an episode about cartoon deaths that the network voluntarily pulls because its tone is wrong for the moment. On the other side, a year of episodes whose tone was, by widespread account, wrong for a significant portion of the show's actual audience, and that the network had no inclination to pull, because that audience was no longer the one the network was protecting. The fan critique was not really that the Salty Codgers pull was bad. The fan critique was that the same network that could move quickly to protect a sensitive audience, when an external event made it necessary, had spent 2 years declining to make any similar move when the audience being damaged was its own original fan base. The asymmetry has a structural explanation. The audience the show was hurting the older fans of the original Teen Titans was not, in 2015, an advertiser-friendly demographic for Cartoon Network. They were adults, in their 20s, with disposable income and complicated taste. The advertiser the network was selling to was not interested in those adults. The advertiser was interested in the children. The children, not the adults, were what kept the network's afternoon block valuable. By prioritizing the children's experience over the adult's experience, the network was making a rational commercial decision. The decision was rational. The decision was also, from the perspective of the older audience, the source of the problem. The network was not refusing to engage with their grievance because the grievance was illegitimate. It was refusing because the grievance came from the wrong demographic. The episode, watched today on streaming, is unremarkable. It is a comedic premise played for laughs. The decision to pull it was reasonable, given the timing. But the contrast remains. The show that had pulled an episode about death because of an external tragedy was the same show that had, only weeks earlier, aired an episode whose climax involved farting on a critic and breaking the screen the audience was watching through. Both decisions, fans noted, came from the same room. The sixth controversy concerns a child. His name was William Walter Thompson. He was, according to the fan wiki and to interviews given by his family, a teenager with Burkitt syndrome, a rare genetic disorder that affects the parathyroid glands, the kidneys, and the inner ears. He was a fan of both the original Teen Titans and Teen Titans Go. Through the Make-A-Wish Foundation, his wish was granted. The wish was to appear as a character in an episode of the show. The episode was called Wall-E T. It aired on May 19, 2016, as the 33rd episode of Season 3 and the 137th overall episode of the series. The plot is, again, meta. Wall-E T appears at Titans Tower as the only fan the Titans have ever had. The Titans, beaten down by years of being called garbage, are skeptical of his fandom. Robin, suspicious, asks Wall-E T whether he prefers Teen Titans Go or the original 2003 Teen Titans. Wall-E T points to the original Teen Titans poster. Robin sighs in disappointment. Cyborg agrees, saying that the original is better in terms of animation and art style. The Titans then learn, through Raven, that the presence of a true fan amplifies a superhero's powers. Wall-E T, by being their fan, gives them strength. They use his fan strength to defeat Gizmo. The episode ends with the Titans singing a song to Wall-E T, thanking him for being their fan. Burkitt syndrome, the condition William Walter Thompson lived with, is sometimes called HDR syndrome, an acronym for hypoparathyroidism, sensory neural deafness, and renal disease. It is genetic, it is rare, it is often diagnosed early, in childhood, and it complicates a child's life across multiple body systems at once. The kidneys, which the disease affects, are responsible for filtering blood. The parathyroid glands, which the disease affects, are responsible for regulating calcium. The inner ears, which the disease affects, are responsible for hearing. A child with Burkitt syndrome lives daily with the awareness that several core systems of the body are working against him at once. The Make-A-Wish Foundation grants wishes to children who have been diagnosed with critical illnesses, and Burkitt syndrome qualifies. The wish, in this case, was specific. The boy did not ask to meet a celebrity, or to take a trip, or to receive a gift. He asked to be in his favorite show. He asked to be drawn, animated, and given a voice line. There is a layer of the episode that is genuinely warm. The producers have been told about a sick child whose dying wish was to be in the show. They wrote an episode for him. They cast him to voice the character of himself. Although the voice was, in the end, dubbed over by Tara Strong, because Cartoon Network refused to air the episode with non-crew voice acting, and the dubbing had to be done in automated dialogue replacement at the last minute. According to fan wiki accounts of the production, the original recording with William Walter Thompson was completed during his visit. Tara Strong, who voices Raven on the show, was brought in afterward to re-record the lines, matching the script and the lip flap after the network's Standards and Practices Department determined that the broadcast could not include voice work from a non-union, non-crew performer. The decision was bureaucratic. It was not a decision against the child. The boy still got to record the lines. He still got to see his character on the screen. The voice you heard when the episode aired was Tara Strong. The performance in spirit was the boy's. William Walter Thompson, in interviews and clips that surfaced after the episode aired, was visibly delighted by the experience. The Make-A-Wish Foundation generally does not arrange experiences that are bad for the child. By the standards of children's television, Wall-E T was a kindness extended to a child who deserved kindness. If you watch the episode now, with the context of who Wall-E T is in the real world, the warmth comes through. The Titans, who in every other Hater episode have been written as smug and dismissive, soften around Wall-E T. The closing song they sing for him is, by the show's standards, sincere. The episode ends with a hug. There is no ironic punchline. There is no twist where the kid turns out to be a critic. The boy is the boy, the kindness is the kindness. The producers, in the parts of the episode that exist purely to serve William Walter Thompson, were not playing the long game. They were making him happy. There is another layer of the episode that has been harder for some viewers to defend. The plot of Wall-E T stripped of its real-world origin, is the same plot as every other hater episode the show had produced. The Titans are widely hated. They have only one fan. The fan, who is sympathetic and innocent, gives them the strength to keep going. The episode places the audience in the position of the Titans, the critic in the position of every viewer who is not Wally T, and the producer in the position of someone who has the moral cover of a sick child to defend the show against any criticism. By making the show's only fan a real child from the Make-A-Wish Foundation, the producers had, intentionally or not, made it nearly impossible to criticize the episode without seeming to be cruel to the child. This is what made Wally T the most quietly resented of the hater episodes among critics of the show. It was not that the episode was bad to William Walter Thompson. By all available evidence, the experience of being in the show was meaningful to him, and the producers and crew treated him with care. The resentment was about the structure of the episode itself, which used the Make-A-Wish Foundation as a shield. Several long-form review pieces from that period, including reactions from members of the older fan community on the TV.com user review pages, made the same complaint in close to the same words. The reviewer would say something like, "The kid did not deserve to be used as a shield." The fan wiki itself acknowledges the structural problem. In the trivia section for the episode, it notes that this was the 4th hater episode in Teen Titans Go, after Let's Get Serious, The Return of Slade, and The Fourth Wall. It also notes that the original intent was not to attack the audience, but to grant the boy's wish. Both things can be true. The episode can be a kindness to a child, and also an episode whose structural function inside the show's broader pattern was the same as the structural function of the previous 3 hater episodes. The producers, intentionally or otherwise, had folded a Make-A-Wish event into the running joke they had been doing since 2014, in a way that made the running joke harder to argue with. To complain that the episode was another hater episode was to risk seeming to complain about Wally T himself. To not complain was to let the show off the hook for repeating the pattern. The Make-A-Wish Foundation, founded in 1980, has granted hundreds of thousands of wishes since its establishment, and many of those wishes have involved entertainment industry experiences. Children have appeared in television shows, met actors, visited film sets, and had their names attached to characters. The Foundation's protocol in those cases is generally that the production accommodates the child's wish without using the child's presence to advance any agenda beyond the granting of the wish itself. The convention is, in industry terms, well established. A children's network production that hosts a Make-A-Wish recipient typically frames the appearance as a guest spot, integrates the child into a regular plot, and does not build the entire episode's thematic structure around the child's presence. The Wally T episode departed from that convention by making the child the thematic anchor of an episode whose plot centered on the show's own self-defense. The departure was not large enough to constitute a violation of any Foundation guideline. It was large enough that, when the older audience pointed it out, the criticism had a clear target. The choice to build the episode this way was a producer's choice. The producer made it. The complication of Wally T is that nobody comes out of it cleanly. The show is generous to a child and weaponizes that generosity. The audience, in objecting, has to draw a line between objecting to the framing and objecting to the child, and that line is not always clean in heated discourse. William Walter Thompson, who deserved nothing but kindness, became, through no fault of his own, a piece of programming that the producers used to tell their critics to leave the show alone. To this day, the episode is one of the most discussed in the show's online history, and the discussion has never quite resolved. It is the only episode of the show whose user score on IMDb sits at 6.0 out of 10, the same as The Fourth Wall, and whose comment threads are filled with viewers attempting to articulate why an episode that contained a beautiful gesture also contained woven through it an aggressive pattern. If you have ever tried to criticize a piece of media that built itself, in part, on the participation of someone genuinely vulnerable, you know how the conversation goes. The defender lifts the vulnerable person, holds them in front of the criticism, and asks the critic whether they are really willing to attack a sick child. The critic, who was not attacking the child, has to spend the next several minutes establishing carefully that the criticism is structural, not personal. By the time the critic has done that work, the audience has moved on. The defender has won the exchange not by addressing the criticism, but by reframing it. This is the dynamic the Wally T episode set up, whether the producers intended it or not. The structure of the episode made the structural complaint look like a personal attack on the boy at the center of it. Many of the people who tried to articulate the complaint in 2016 and in the years afterward gave up partway through. Some did not give up. The arguments they wrote on review pages and on long-form fan community posts are still findable now. They are precise, They distinguished carefully between what the episode did to the boy, which was good, and what the episode did to the audience, which was something else. The Wally T episode also raised, for some viewers, a question about the relationship between a show's own self-defense and the dignity of the people involved in that defense. The boy did not write the episode. The boy was 11 years old. He did not have the context to know that his appearance on the show was being slotted into a years-long pattern of the show insulting its critics. He simply got to be in his favorite show. The producers, who did have that context, made a choice. They could have written him an episode that did not double as an argument against the show's critics. They could have given him a normal episode, a treasure hunt, or a battle, or a comedy of errors, and put him in it as a guest star. They did not. They wrote instead the Fourth Hater episode with William Walter Thompson at the center of it. The episode functions as an argument that the only legitimate fan of the show is a sick child whose love for the Titans heals their bruised confidence, and that any other fan who has criticism to offer is, by implication, the opposite of that child. The construction is elegant. The construction is also what set off in the older fan community the resentment that the Wally T episode has carried for the better part of a decade. The seventh controversy is no longer about the show's relationship with its fans. It is about its relationship with its international audience, and with the censors who decide what airs in those markets. The episode is Booty Scooty. It aired on September 5th, 2016, as the 46th episode of the third season. The premise is a parody of the 1985 Richard Donner film The Goonies. The Titans, threatened with the demolition of Titan's Tower to make way for a shopping mall, embark on a treasure hunt for pirate gold based on an old map. The narrative beats follow the Goonies closely, including a truffle shuffle parody, a chained creature in a basement modeled on sloth, and a piano made of bones. If you have seen The Goonies, you would recognize each beat as it arrives. The episode operates on its surface as a loving homage to a 1980s adventure comedy. The premise is tight. The pacing, by the show's 11-minute standard, is brisk. Without the controversy, the episode would simply be a competent parody of a beloved film, the kind of thing the show produced regularly without incident. The truffle shuffle parody is the controversy. In the original Goonies, the character Chunk is forced to expose his stomach and shuffle his belly to be allowed inside. In Booty Scooty, Robin is forced to perform a dance routine in which he shakes his backside in front of his teammates, while a song plays from Cyborg's chest plate. The dance is presented as a humiliating ritual the other Titans have invented as a condition for letting Robin into the tower. The choreography is twerking. The episode does not use the word twerking. The episode calls the dance the Booty Scooty. The substitution of vocabulary is a strategy the show used regularly, in moments where the writers wanted to import an adult-coded behavior into a children's program. By renaming the move, the writers preserved deniability. By keeping the choreography intact, they preserved the gag. The audience, depending on its age and its familiarity with the move's adult origins, would either notice the substitution or not. Younger viewers would see a silly dance with a silly name. Older viewers, including parents watching over a child's shoulder, would see something else. The song that plays during the dance, with lyrics that include the line, "Scoot your booty, I do the booty scooty," is reprised throughout the episode. Robin is forced to perform the dance multiple times. Beast Boy, Cyborg, and other characters perform versions of the dance in subsequent episodes. The HIV-5 perform a version of the dance in a later episodes that has been censored in Arab countries. A merchandise tie-in, a Spin Master toy called the DC Comics Teen Titans Go Booty Scooty Robin, was released in 2016 and re-released in January 2025. The toy contains a button on its foot that activates a built-in motor, causing Robin to perform the dance, complete with twerking, in time with built-in music. If you imagine for a moment the journey this product had to take, you can map it. A licensing executive at Spin Master had to read a pitch document and approve the manufacturing of a posable Robin figure, whose central feature is a hip motor. A factory had to engineer the mechanism. A safety review had to clear the toy for the children's market. A box artist had to design packaging that conveyed the toy's central feature, which was a small Robin doll twerking on demand. A retail buyer at Burlington or Walmart or another big box chain had to choose to stock it. None of these decisions were accidents. The toy exists because every step of that chain looked at the previous step and decided, this is fine. The reaction in the international markets was swift. Cartoon Network in the Middle East banned the dance entirely. The episode Curse of the Booty Scooty, which is a sequel to Booty Scooty and which aired in 2018, was removed from the Middle East schedule entirely. Multiple other episodes that contained twerking, including Cool School, Hey, You Don't Forget About Me in Your Memory, Justice League's Next Top Talent Idol Stars Second Greatest Team Edition, and Top of the Titans' Raddest Songs. had specific scenes censored. In Southeast Asia, similar cuts were made. In several markets, the dance was simply removed. If you watched the show on any feed outside the United States during the late 2010, your version of the show was a different version. There were entire episodes you would not see, and entire scenes inside otherwise unedited episodes that would simply skip past the dance, leaving the comedic beats around the dance to land without the dance itself. The international cut of Teen Titans Go is a meaningfully shorter show than the domestic cut, and the difference is almost entirely the booty scooty. The pattern of the booty scooty was not isolated within the show's catalog. The show's running gag mode by 2016 had begun to include a small but consistent rotation of jokes that depended on adult-coded behavior being performed by child characters, with deniability built into the framing. The booty scooty was the most prominent. The show's recurring use of a 1990s rap aesthetic, including songs that referenced the production style of the late Notorious B.I.G., produced its own minor friction. The Mo Money Mo Problems episode, named after Notorious B.I.G., and Sean Combs and Mace track from 1997 was titled in a way that some viewers and reviewers found tonally unusual for a children's program, given that the original song's lyrics, which the episode does not directly reproduce, are about the psychological cost of fame and wealth. The show's music parody mode, which produced a number of original tracks within episodes, regularly imported the cadences and the structural choices of adult hip-hop into its children's program format. The booty scooty, in that context, was not an outlier. It was a node in a network of choices the show kept making, year after year, that put adult-derived material in the foreground of episodes intended for the youngest end of the children's television audience. The conversation in the United States was different. The episode aired without significant editing on the domestic Cartoon Network feed. Critics, particularly older ones, raised concerns about the appropriateness of using a sexualized dance move from adult context as a recurring gag in a children's program. Defenders pointed out that the show had clearly chosen to use a euphemistic name, the booty scooty, in an attempt to soften the move's adult connotations and make the gag legible as silly children's humor rather than as something that resembled what it physically was. The defense was real, but it was not universally accepted. Multiple reviews in the years following the episode's airing argued that the choice to make twerking a recurring visual joke in a kids' show was a misjudgment that the show kept doubling down on, episode after episode, year after year. The defining moment of the controversy came 9 years after the original episode aired. In early 2025, a video circulated on X, the social media platform formerly called Twitter, of a mother in a Burlington coat factory, holding the Booty Scooty Robin toy, expressing visible shock and disapproval at what the toy did when its button was pressed. The video sparked an extended online argument about whether the mother had a point or whether she had simply not been paying attention to what her child had been watching. The toy had, after all, been on shelves in some form since 2016. The episode had been in syndication for nearly a decade. The dance was a recurring gag. None of this was new in 2025. What was new was the unfamiliarity of the parent, who appeared to have not registered until that moment in the toy aisle what her child's favorite show had been showing them for the better part of a decade. The video, depending on which side of the algorithm you saw it from, played as either vindication or a scolding. On one side, the longtime critics of the show pointed to the mother's reaction as evidence that they had been right all along. The dance, when divorced from the show's softening framing and presented as a piece of plastic in a discount store, looked like what it was. The euphemism of the name, the Booty Scooty, did not survive the encounter with a parent who had not been trained, by years of show watching, to read the gag as harmless. On the other side, defenders of the show pointed out that the mother had clearly been buying the toy for her child, that the show was rated TV PG and had been for over a decade, and that the responsibility for monitoring children's media falls in part on parents. Both sides had a point. The discourse, as discourse on these platforms tends to, did not resolve. What it produced, as a side effect, was a small spike in attention to a controversy that had been steadily aging since 2016. And a renewed conversation about what the show had been allowed to do year after year in front of a generation of children whose parents were not always paying attention. The Booty Scooty episode and its derivatives are still in rotation. The toy is still being sold in re-releases with the twerking mechanism intact. The dance remains, in international markets, one of the most consistently censored elements of the show's catalog. In domestic markets, it remains uncensored, and the recurring nature of the gag suggests that the producers and the network considered the question and concluded that the joke was worth keeping. The international censors, including the Middle Eastern feed of Cartoon Network and the Southeast Asia feed, came to a different conclusion. If you compare those two judgments, you can see in miniature the broader argument the show has produced about what is and is not appropriate for children. The American producers said yes. The international censors said no. Both decisions are still in effect. The episode airs differently depending on where you are watching from every single day. The story of the Booty Scooty also speaks to the broader question of how a long-running children's program manages adult-coded content over time. Most American children's programming, by industry convention, treats euphemism as an acceptable workaround for material that would not otherwise be cleared for the demographic. The Looney Tunes shorts of the 1940s used euphemism. The Hanna-Barbera productions of the 1960s used it. The Powerpuff Girls, in its original 1998 run, occasionally relied on euphemism to land jokes that were aimed past the children in the audience to the adults watching with them. The convention is well established. What made the Booty Scooty distinctive was not the use of euphemism. It was the choice of source material. The original move, which the show was renaming and incorporating, was not a generic adult behavior. It was a specific dance move with a specific origin in adult musical culture. The renaming did not change the move. It changed only the label. The label and move combination was, in the framing the show preferred, a children's gag. In the framing the international censors preferred, it was an adult move with a children's wrapper. The two framings produced two different broadcast policies. Both were defensible. Neither has been adopted by the other side. The eighth controversy is the most international and the most directly diplomatic. The episode is Hot Salad Water. It aired on June 30th, 2017 as the 26th episode of the 4th season. The premise is built around an American holiday. The episode was scheduled as the show's Independence Day special, premiering 4 days before the 4th of July, 2017. The plot involves Robin discovering, to his horror, that the other Titans have started drinking tea. He associates tea with the British. He associates the British with the colonial era. He becomes convinced that the consumption of tea is corrupting his teammates, who after one cup begin speaking in British accents, calling television the telly, and behaving in a manner the episode codes as foreign and suspicious. The setup, played for laughs, is the show in its most aggressive Americana mode. The episode treats Britishness, in general, as a contaminant. Robin's solution is to wage war on tea. The body of the episode is built on that premise. The escalation is absurdist in the show's standard register. Robin discovers that the source of the tea epidemic is the British monarchy itself. He travels to England, or to a stylized animated cartoon version of England, with the Titans. They confront the Queen of England, voiced as an exaggerated authoritarian villain in the visual language of a children's show antagonist. The Queen, in the climax of the episode, transforms a building modeled on Big Ben into a giant mecha. The Titans, fighting back, animate the Statue of Liberty as their own counter-mecha. The two giant national symbols battle in the city in the manner of a kaiju film. The Titans win. Robin, in the final beats of the episode, declares that tea is dead and that America has won. Other British landmarks, including a stylized version of a Hogwarts-style castle and a night bus parody, appear briefly as background gags during the chase scenes, all rendered in the show's flat cartoon style. The episode is 12 minutes long and contains, by a generous count, more anti-British jokes per minute than any other episode in the show's catalog. The premise, on its own, is the show in caricature mode. The show had done this kind of episode. The show had built episodes around exaggerated stereotypes of other groups before. What made Hot Salad Water different, and what gave it its lasting position in the show's controversy ledger, was timing. The episode aired on June 30th, 2017. The British monarch at the time, Queen Elizabeth II, was alive, and was the longest reigning monarch in British history. She would die 5 years later, on September 8th, 2022, at the age of 96. The episode aired during her lifetime. It depicted her, on screen, in the visual register of a villain. It mocked her tea, her accent, her court, and her national symbols. The show's American audience, who in 2017 had no particular emotional stake in the British royal family, mostly saw the episode as an exaggerated patriotic comedy. The British audience, who had a different relationship with the actual Queen, saw something else. The villain of the episode is Queen Elizabeth II. The episode portrays her as the antagonist behind the corruption of the Titans. She has Big Ben transform into a giant mecha. She drives the mecha across the city, smashing through American billboards, including one for America that after she destroys it, reads America. Robin counters her by activating the Statue of Liberty as a counter mecha. The episode climaxes in a battle between the Statue of Liberty and a mechanized Big Ben. The Queen is of course defeated. The episode was, on its surface, a 4th of July parody, framed as a celebration of American independence and as a comic exaggeration of the kind of patriotic fervor that fills the holiday. Some viewers read it that way, others did not. The portrayal of a sitting monarch, particularly one who at the time of airing was the longest reigning British monarch in history, as a literal supervillain who attempts to invade and conquer the United States, was received in the United Kingdom and in much of the Commonwealth as something between a misjudgment and an insult. According to multiple sources documenting the episode's broadcast history, including the fan wiki and TV Tropes recap pages, Hot Salad Water was initially pulled from broadcasting in the United Kingdom. It eventually returned to UK rotation as a rerun, but its early airings were limited because of the negative reception. Multiple Commonwealth markets restricted the episode. The fan wiki notes that the episode is considered very controversial and offensive, having upset both British and American audiences. The former for the obvious reason, and the latter because the patriotic framing was so heavy-handed that even some American viewers found it embarrassing rather than celebratory. If you watched the episode in the UK as a child in 2017, you may not have seen it at all. If you watched it in 2022, after the Queen's death, you would have noticed, perhaps with some discomfort, that the antagonist of the episode was now a recently deceased real person whose state funeral had been broadcast around the world only weeks earlier. The September 8th, 2022, death of Queen Elizabeth II changed the meaning of the episode without altering a single frame of it. The episode, when it aired in 2017, was a comedy about a living public figure. The episode, when it aired in syndication in 2023, was a comedy about a recently deceased monarch whose face was, at that point, on every coin in the United Kingdom and on the front of every newspaper in Europe. The producers had not made the episode with the intent of mocking a dead person. They had made it with the intent of mocking a living institution. But syndication does not respect the difference. The episode kept airing. It airs now in some markets with the Queen exactly where she was in 2017, on screen in the role of an animated villain. The episode also raised questions about the show's overall handling of foreign cultures. A later episode, Baby Mouth, was criticized in some communities for its handling of Babylonian themes in a way that several reviewers described as not just xenophobic, but racially insensitive. The pattern of Hot Salad Water was not isolated. The show, in its 11-minute format, regularly produced episodes that lampooned foreign cultures with the same blunt comedic logic it applied to its critics, and the results, when those cultures' actual residents watched the episodes, were not always taken as gentle fun. If you have lived in any country other than the United States and watched the show's catalog with attention, you will have noticed the pattern. The show treats foreign cultures the way it treats its critics, by reducing them to a small, exaggerated set of behaviors and then mocking those behaviors at length. The reduction is, by the standards of children's comedy, conventional. The accumulation, across hundreds of episodes, is what some viewers found exhausting. The historical context for the British reaction is also worth pulling out separately because the timing of the episode's airing was not the only thing that complicated its reception. The relationship between American animated comedy and the British monarchy has not always been frictionless. Earlier American children's productions had occasionally taken light potshots at British figures, but the productions in question had usually been careful to keep the actual monarch off screen, or to render the figure in a generic enough way that the depiction did not land as a portrait of a specific living person. Hot Salad Water did not take that route. The Queen in the episode is not a generic monarch. She is named, identified by appearance, and given the recognizable accent and bearing of the actual Queen Elizabeth II. The portrayal is unambiguous. Anyone watching in 2017 or later was being asked to laugh at a depiction of an identifiable public figure. The British viewer's discomfort was, in that sense, not a misreading of the episode. It was the episode landing exactly the way it had been written to land, in front of an audience the producers had not been thinking about when they wrote it. The 4th of July framing, which the producers had clearly intended as a patriotic celebration, ended up being one of the show's most exported sources of friction. American viewers tended to forget the episode quickly, both because the patriotic angle made it forgettable and because the politics it engaged with were comfortable for an American audience. International viewers remembered it, years later, when conversations about the show's worst episodes are held in international fan communities. Hot Salad Water tends to come up before The Return of Slade does. Because The Return of Slade is a domestic story and Hot Salad Water is the story they themselves had to live with. If you ask a British fan of the original 2003 Teen Titans which Teen Titans Go episode they hate the most, you are unlikely to hear about the clown. You are likely to hear about the Queen. The clown was someone else's grievance. The Queen was theirs. The complication that no one in the production could have foreseen came on September 8th, 2022, when Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. She was 96 years old. The British government entered a period of national mourning. King Charles III ascended to the throne. The image of the Queen, which had been a fixture of British public life for 70 years, suddenly became a memorial image rather than a satirical one. The episode aged poorly overnight. A piece of comedic content that had portrayed the Queen as an evil mecha-piloting villain became, in the days after her death, an extremely uncomfortable artifact. The episode's UK availability, already limited, became more limited. According to several fan sources, the episode is now effectively unavailable in the United Kingdom. The international markets that had restricted it earlier maintained those restrictions. The episode is now one of the small handful of Teen Titans Go episodes that has been quietly retired from significant portions of the international rotation. The episode also raised questions about the show's overall handling of foreign cultures. A later episode, Baby Mouth, was criticized in some communities for its handling of Babylonian themes in a way that several reviewers described as not just xenophobic, but racially insensitive. The pattern of hot salad water was not isolated. The show, in its 11-minute format, regularly produced episodes that lampooned foreign cultures with the same blunt comedic logic it applied to its critics. And the results, when those cultures' actual residents watched the episodes, were not always taken as gentle fun. The 4th of July framing, which the producers had clearly intended as a patriotic celebration, ended up being one of the show's most exported sources of friction. American viewers tended to forget the episode quickly, both because the patriotic angle made it forgettable and because the politics it engaged with were comfortable for an American audience. International viewers remembered it years later. When conversations about the show's worst episodes are held in international fan communities, Hot Salad Water tends to come up before The Return of Slade does. Because The Return of Slade is a domestic story, and Hot Salad Water is the story they themselves had to live with. The 9th controversy is not an episode at all. It is a schedule. By 2017, 4 years after Teen Titans Go had premiered, Cartoon Network had become a network whose programming strategy revolved almost entirely around the show. Other Cartoon Network properties, including Adventure Time, Steven Universe, Regular Show, The Amazing World of Gumball, Clarence, Uncle Grandpa, Oklahoma KO, Let's Be Heroes, and We Bare Bears were still on the air, but their slots were shrinking. Teen Titans Go was airing in repeated blocks across the day. The fan community at the Qualitopedia, an aggregator of community grievances, estimated that by 2017, the show was occupying approximately 90% of the network's schedule. If you watched Cartoon Network in that period, the experience was distinctive. Whatever time of day you turned the channel on, the show you found, more often than not, was the same show. The show that you turned to find something else, on the chance that something else was airing, was, more often than not, also Teen Titans Go. The pattern was not subtle. Cartoon Network had, since 2009, been producing what is called bumper content, the short interstitial segments that play between programs to brand the network. By 2017, the bumpers themselves were dominated by Titans Go characters. The network's social media presence, its merchandise tie-ins at retail, its convention booths, and its app placement all promoted the show first. The other shows existed, but the visual ecosystem of the network had been reorganized around one property in a way that, for fans of Adventure Time and Steven Universe and Regular Show, felt like an active suppression of the shows they wanted to watch. The most documented instance came over Christmas 2017. From Christmas Eve to New Year's Eve of that year, Cartoon Network ran what fans came to call a super marathon. According to the TV Tropes recap of the period, 99.5% of the channel's programming during that week was Teen Titans Go. The single exception was a half-hour block of Steven Universe, which contained 2 episodes that had already premiered on the Cartoon Network app a month earlier and which aired on December 29th. Otherwise, every hour of the channel's daytime schedule, the entire week of Christmas, was Teen Titans Go. The chart of the schedule, when fans reproduced it as an image, became a meme. The image showed 7 full days, broken into half-hour slots, with every block filled with the same show. The visual was absurd. It looked like a programming error. It was not. It was the network's deliberate decision. The exact reasoning has never been officially confirmed, but the contemporary speculation, which circulated heavily on the Qualitopedia and on related fan communities, was that the network president at the time, Christina Miller, was using the show's high ratings among young children as a tool to depress the ratings of other shows that the network considered too raunchy or too violent for its target demographic. The speculation, which has not been substantively confirmed, has nevertheless persisted because no other explanation for the marathon ever surfaced. There was, in addition to the Christmas marathon, a pattern of smaller marathons throughout 2017 and 2018 that targeted specific viewing windows. Voice Awards marathons, in which the show would air on the evening of an industry awards ceremony to capitalize on the resulting traffic, became routine. Martin Luther King Day in January 2018 was given a multi-hour Titans Go block. School holidays were saturated with the show. The network's promotional campaigns of the period included one called Your New Favorite Show, which was Teen Titans Go's promo language for new arrivals to the network's demographic, suggesting to younger children that the show was the show they should be watching. Advertising buys for the show extended to channels and contexts that were unusual for a children's network production, including, in the lead-up to the 2018 theatrical film, advertising slots during programming targeted at older audiences. The network was treating the show as the network. There was, in a real sense, no separation. If you have ever been on a road trip in the United States during this period, in a hotel room with a television, you may have noticed something. The television in the hotel room, by industry default, was usually tuned to a children's-friendly cable channel as part of the room setup standard. Cartoon Network was a common default. The channel, when you turn the television on, was more often than not airing Teen Titans Go. It would have been airing Teen Titans Go in the morning, when you woke up. It would have been airing Teen Titans Go in the afternoon. When you returned from sightseeing, it would have been airing Teen Titans Go in the evening, when you came back to sleep. The experience of seeing the show in this way, in default settings outside of your own home, gave many viewers an unusually concrete sense of how saturated the schedule had become. The show was no longer something you had to seek out. It was the ambient programming of an entire cable bracket. You could not escape it without changing the channel, and even then, the next channel might also be airing it, on a different feed at a different point in its episode rotation. The fan response was loud. Multiple petitions began circulating on change.org. One, called Cancel Teen Titans Go the 2018 movie, started in September 2017 and demanded that Warner Bros. Cancel the upcoming theatrical film. Another, called Remove the Extreme Amounts of Teen Titans Go, began in October 2015 and was still active. A third, called Cancel Teen Titans Go and Bring Back the Original, started in early 2017. The petitions accumulated supporters in the low thousands, which, in the context of online petitions, is a meaningful number for a kid's cartoon. They did not stop the show. They did not noticeably change the schedule. They became, in the long view, a record of how angry a portion of the audience had become about the show's domination of the network. If you signed any of those petitions, you would now be approaching your 30th birthday, and the show you signed against 8 years ago is still airing. The marathon strategy continued, in modified form, into 2018 and 2019. According to TV Tropes' record of the show's adored by the network status, episodes were used as filler to compete with rival programming, including the season premieres and finales of NBC's The Voice from 2016 to 2018. Specific episodes, like Mo Money Mo Problems and Caged Tiger, played in repeated blocks, sometimes 3 times in a single day. The Hollywood-themed episodes from 2018 played in nearly every other hour during the run-up to the theatrical film's release. Teen Titans Go was no longer a show on the network. It was the network's primary way of filling time. The decision had consequences for everything else on Cartoon Network. Several shows that had built devoted followings, including Steven Universe and Adventure Time, found their slots shrinking. New episodes were buried in odd time slots or pushed to the network's app. Pokémon eventually moved to Disney XD. Sonic Boom and Justice League Action were given poor weekend slots. The network's broader programming, which had been one of the most varied on cable in the late 2000s and early 2010s, narrowed. The criticism was not really that Teen Titans Go was a bad show. The criticism was that the network had tied its identity to the show so completely that everything else had been sacrificed. The producers, in interviews, did not directly address the schedule. The schedule was a network decision, not theirs. But the schedule was the context in which all of their other decisions were being made. Every Hater episode aired in 2017 and 2018 against the backdrop of a network that was openly using their show to crowd out other programming. The audience that hated the show could not escape it. The show was on every hour, every day. The pattern that the producers had spent years setting up of mocking critics inside the episodes themselves was being amplified by a network strategy that put those episodes in front of the critics constantly. The result was that the resentment compounded. By the end of 2017, The show had become, in the fan community's framing, both the symptom of and the explanation for the decline of Cartoon Network as a creative network. The 2017 schedule, in retrospect, marks the period at which the older fan community, the one that had come up with the original Teen Titans and with the network's earlier creative comedy era, gave up on the network. Many of those viewers in the years that followed simply stopped watching cable. Some of them moved to streaming. Some of them moved to YouTube, where animation criticism became briefly a major content category. Some of them moved to other networks entirely. The departure was not visible in any single ratings number, because the network was, by every metric that mattered to advertisers, still successful. But the departure was real. The audience that had been with the network through the original Teen Titans, through Codename Kids Next Door, through Camp Lazlo and Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, and the original Powerpuff Girls, was, by the end of 2017, not the audience the network was trying to keep. The Christmas Marathon was, in that sense, not a mistake. It was a deliberate signal the network was no longer for the older audience. The older audience, on average, took the signal. If you were that audience, the schedule of December 2017 told you what you needed to know about your relationship with the network you had grown up watching. The final controversy is the one the show itself wrote about. It is the way Teen Titans Go, in its 10th year and beyond, has continued to be both extraordinarily commercially successful and extraordinarily resented by the audience that the network displaced to keep it on the air. The marker is the show's own 200th episode, which it called the self-indulgent 200th episode spectacular. Parts 1 and 2 aired together on November 24th, 2017, as the 44th and 45th episodes of the 4th season. Despite the title and the network promotion, the actual 200th episode of the show was technically an earlier episode called Thanksgiving, due to how the production grouped episode pairs together. The number 200 was, the show acknowledged, an arbitrary marker, and the show celebrated it anyway with a self-aware double-length installment. The plot of the self-indulgent 200th episode spectacular is, again, meta. The Titans realize that their world is disappearing. They go through the fourth wall to confront the people responsible. They arrive at Warner Bros. Studios in Burbank, California. They meet their voice actors, animated as themselves, including Greg Sipes, Hynden Walch, Kari Payton, Scott Menville, and Tara Strong. The voice actors complain about the aggressive recording schedule. The Titans confront the showrunners, Aaron Horvath and Michael Jelenic, who are also drawn as themselves, and who explain that they are too tired to write the 200th episode. The Titans, faced with the dissolution of their own existence, decide to write the episode themselves. They write fart jokes. The showrunners critique the fart jokes for not coming from character. They negotiate, they make the episode together. The episode contains, as a recurring background element, a t-shirt worn by a minor character at Warner Brothers that reads Teen Titans number. The t-shirt is a reference to the haters. The episode's whole conceit is that the producers know they are widely disliked, that they have been widely disliked since the show began, that the show keeps going anyway, and that the act of keeping going is in the producer's framing the show's victory. The episode is titled, by the producer's own choice, the self-indulgent 200th episode spectacular. The word self-indulgent is the producer's admission. They knew the episode was self-indulgent. They named it that. The episode aired on November 24th, 2017, 2 months before the show would the following November hit its episode 250. The producers were not slowing down. The network was not pulling back. The schedule that same week was the all-teen Titans Go Christmas Marathon. The producers were not hiding from any of it. They were celebrating it. The episode is, in its own way, the most honest thing the show ever produced. It told the audience exactly what was happening, exactly what the producers thought of the criticism, and exactly how the producers planned to respond. If you watch the self-indulgent 200th episode spectacular when it first aired, you watch the show acknowledge in its own voice every complaint the audience had been making for 4 years. The complaints were named, the complaints were dramatized, the complaints were, briefly, given a moment to speak, and then the episode pivoted in its closing minutes to the conclusion that the show was going to keep going anyway. Because keeping going was the show's job, and because the producers had decided, long before the 200th episode aired, that the response to the complaints was production. The more the show was complained about, the more episodes the show would produce. The complaints, in the producer's framing, were the fuel. The show had been engineered over 4 years to convert complaints into episodes. The 200th episode was the engine running at full speed in front of the audience for everyone to see. The audience could either accept the engine or stop watching. The episode did not pretend, even for a moment, that there was a third option. The plan was to keep going. The plan worked. 8 months after the self-indulgent 200th episode spectacular aired, on July 27, 2018, Teen Titans Go to the Movies opened in theaters in the United States and Canada. It was directed by Aaron Horvath, Michael Jelenic, and Peter Rita McHale. It featured the voices of the original Teen Titans Go cast, plus Will Arnett as Slade, Kristen Bell as Jade Wilson, and the voice cameo of Stan Lee, who would die 3 months later on November 12, 2018. The film was made on a budget of approximately $10 million. It grossed over $52 million worldwide. Its domestic Rotten Tomatoes critic score peaked before its release at 100% and settled at around 91% on broader release. Audience scores trailed lower, particularly among older fans of the original 2003 series, but the film was a commercial success and was generally praised even by some critics of the show as a clever, self-aware, and surprisingly intelligent superhero parody. The film's plot, in summary, was the show's own argument about itself, weaponized for the theatrical format. The Titans, jealous that every other DC superhero has a movie, decide to make their own. They search for a director, find Jade Wilson, and learn that the film industry will not give them a movie unless they have an arch-nemesis. They go looking for one. They find Slade, who, in this version of the universe, is voiced by Will Arnett, in a sharp, self-aware register that lands in adult comedy. The film leans into the show's existing metatextual register and amplifies it. The Titans break the fourth wall, address the audience, parody existing DC films, and spend most of the climax aware that they are characters in a film. The film also contains genuinely sharp musical numbers, including songs by the rapper Lil Yachty and the pop singer Halsey, who has a featured singing role. The film as a piece of work was made carefully. The producers, who had spent 5 years inside an 11-minute format, had clearly poured craft into the longer form. The film also contained a moment that, for the older fan community, would become its own controversy. In the closing minutes of Teen Titans Go to the Movies, the original 2003 Teen Titans appear, briefly to suggest that they are still out there, still operating in another corner of the multiverse. The cliffhanger was unmistakable. The original Titans were back, the original animation style was back. To anyone who had spent 12 years waiting for closure on the Things Change cliffhanger, the moment in the theatrical film was the closest thing they had ever been given to that closure. It was also a tease. The original cast members, including Greg Sipes, Hynden Walch, Kari Payton, Scott Menville, and Tara Strong, returned in their original style voices to deliver the cameo. The animation was the original 2003 style, recreated in detail. The musical cue was the original theme. For 2 minutes of screen time, the film handed the older audience the thing they had been asking for. In close to the form they had been asking for it, then the credits rolled. There was no announcement of a continuation. There was no declaration that the original Teen Titans were coming back. The cameo was, in studio terms, a tease. In emotional terms, for the older fans, it was the show acknowledging that it knew exactly what they had been waiting for and offering them a glimpse of it as a parting gift, before going back to making the show that had displaced it. The follow-up, when it came, was not what those fans had hoped for. Teen Titans Go vs. Teen Titans was released after a Comic-Con preview on July 21, 2019, as a direct-to-video animated film on September 24, 2019. It was not a theatrical release. It was not a Season 6. It was a crossover film in which the original Teen Titans, in their original animation, met the Teen Titans Go versions and teamed up to defeat a mutual threat. The original Titans were used again in the comedy mode of the new show. The plot, on close reading, mirrored the plot of The Return of Slade in that the original Titans were treated as the visiting reminder of what the show used to be, and the modern Titans, as usual, were given the last word. The film was generally well received as a comedy. It was generally regarded by the original show fan community as the second of 2 cliffhangers. The first had been the original 2006 series ending. The second was the 2018 movie tease. The third would have to be a real revival which, as of this recording, has not been produced. The original Teen Titans has, in the years since, received no continuation. There is no Season 6. There may never be one. If you watched Teen Titans Go vs. Teen Titans expecting it to deliver the closure that the 2018 cameo had promised, you came away disappointed. The film, by treating the original Titans as guest stars in their own crossover, signaled that the producers were not interested in handing the franchise back to the people who had loved its original incarnation. The original characters were treated, in the film, as figures from a previous era who needed to learn to coexist with their replacements. The replacement framing was not subtle. The original Titans were depicted as more serious, less funny, and somewhat puzzled by the energy of the modern teen. The modern teen, by contrast, was depicted as the dominant version, the one whose comedic logic the film expected the audience to share. By the end of the film, the older Titans had earned, narratively, the right to be in the same room as the modern Titans. The reverse, which would have been a film where the modern Titans had to earn the right to be in the same room as the originals, was never produced. Teen Titans Go, meanwhile, has continued. As of March 2026, the show has aired 447 episodes across 9 seasons. The 9th season premiered in March 2025 and is, as of this writing, ongoing. A 10th season is in development. The show has now run for 13 years, longer than any other Cartoon Network original series in the network's history, and longer than the original Teen Titans series, ran by a margin of more than 10 times. It has produced, by episode count, more than 14 times the volume of content the original ever did. It has also been one of Cartoon Network's most consistent ratings successes, and has been the network's flagship for over a decade. By any commercial metric, the producers won the argument they started in 2013. They were not making the show for the original fans, they were making it for younger viewers who would not remember the original. Those younger viewers showed up. They are still showing up. The show, despite the petitions, despite the hater communities, despite the international censors, despite the Queen, despite the Clown, despite Wally T, despite the marathon, has never been cancelled, has never been substantially redirected, and has never lost its slot. The showrunners, Aaron Horvath and Michael Jelenic, departed their direct showrunner roles in 2020. Horvath, born August 19, 1980, went on to direct the Super Mario Bros. Movie in 2023 alongside Jelenic for Illumination and Nintendo. The film made approximately $1.33 billion worldwide. The two then directed Mario's sequel, planned for 2026. The career path is worth noting because it suggests, in industry terms, that the strategy the two had pursued at Cartoon Network worked. They had taken a children's show concept, executed it with self-awareness and craft, ignored the older fans of the source material, and built a hit. The same strategy, scaled up to the theatrical level, made them, by 2023, two of the most commercially successful animated comedy directors in Hollywood. The mocking of the original Teen Titans fans was, in their hands, a strategy that paid out, twice. The first payout was the show's longevity. The second payout was a billion-dollar Mario film. What the show did lose, somewhere between the return of Slade and the schedule of Christmas 2017, was the loyalty of the audience that had loved the original. That audience never came back. They watch the show now, when they watch it at all, the way you watch something that took something from you. The 6th season they wanted is not coming. The cliffhanger is not getting resolved. The animation style is not coming back. The DC Nation block is not getting reinstated. Young Justice's brief revival on DC Universe and HBO Max softened the wound, slightly, but the wound around Teen Titans is still there. It is still there because Teen Titans Go is still on. Every day, 11 minutes at a time, 447 episodes deep and counting, on a network whose entire programming identity, for almost a decade, was reorganized around its existence. If you ever loved the original 2003 Teen Titans, the experience of the past 12 years has been a long lesson in the difference between what a network owes its audience and what a network considers commercially viable. The original Teen Titans was, by the standards of its era, successful. It ran for 5 seasons, it produced a feature-length film, it had a soundtrack album, a tie-in comic book, an action figure line, and a video game. It earned a place in the early 2000s superhero cartoon landscape alongside Justice League and Batman the Animated Series. The network in 2006 decided to end it. The audience accepted that decision with reluctance and waited. What the audience did not expect was that 7 years later, the same characters would return in a different format for a show that would explicitly mock them for having been the audience that loved the original. The mockery was the part that did not have to happen. The network could have made Teen Titans Go without the mockery. The producers could have written episodes that did not name the older fans as the antagonists. The fact that they did, repeatedly, over multiple seasons, is what turned the older audience's relationship with the network from one of resignation into one of active resentment. You do not have to love something for the rest of your life. You do not have to give a show a 6th season. But if you decide not to, you are not also obligated to taunt the people who wanted the 6th season. That is a separate decision, and it is the decision that the show repeatedly made. Look back, now, at the Clown. The Clown from The Return of Slade. The episode that aired on July 28, 2015, in which Slade did not appear, in which the Titans defeated him off-screen, in which Beast Boy and Cyborg hired a birthday clown for the victory party, in which the clown, updated and made cool, became a city-destroying threat, in which Raven, repeatedly, told the boys that clowns were meant for children and that they should have outgrown them by now. The clown was the audience. The audience was you. The lesson was that you should let go. The strange thing about the clown, watched almost a decade later, is that the clown was right, just not in the way the producers meant. The audience that loved the original Teen Titans did not want the new show to be edgier or darker. They wanted, in the precise sense of the word, the original. They wanted the show they had grown up with. They wanted, more specifically, Season 6. The clown in the episode, the unmodified one, the simple kitty clown that Beast Boy and Cyborg found unimpressive, was meant to represent the actual Teen Titans Go, a show for young children that was not interested in being more than that. The Titans' modified version of the clown, the dangerous one, was meant to represent what the older fans were demanding. The episode's argument was that the older fans were demanding something dark and dangerous and inappropriate, and that the kitty clown they were rejecting was the version that was supposed to exist for the actual target audience. The argument was a straw man. The older fans were not demanding gore. They were demanding their show back. The producers had every right to refuse to make their show. They had no obligation to give a sixth season to anyone. The choice to reframe the refusal, by writing entire episodes in which the people requesting the sixth season were depicted as nostalgic creeps, obsessed with cool clowns, was not a refusal. It was a taunt. It was the producers having decided not to make the show that the older audience wanted, deciding additionally to make a different show that mocked them for wanting it. That is the heart of the resentment, and the reason the resentment has not faded in the 11 years since the clown aired. You do not get over being mocked for grieving, you can move on, but you do not forget the room that mocked you. Whether the show was right to do this, in the end, depends on which audience you ask. The young children who watch the show have nothing to be angry about. They got the show that was made for them. The producers got the success they wanted. The network got more than a decade of reliable ratings. By every metric except one, the strategy worked. The metric it failed on was the one that did not show up in ratings. It was loyalty. Teen Titans Go has more viewers, more episodes, more merchandise, and more cultural penetration than the original Teen Titans ever had. It has fewer defenders. The audience that came up with the show, who watched it as children, are in their early 20s now, and they will inherit the same complicated relationship with it that the original fans had with their show. They will watch it on streaming with their own children, and they will explain, with whatever patience they have, that this version of the Titans was the version they grew up with. The cycle will continue. Some of those younger fans will discover, eventually, that their show replaced something. Some of them will discover the original. Some of them will discover Young Justice. Some of them will read about the petitions, the marathons, the clown, the queen, the Make-A-Wish episode. Some of them will side with the producers. Some of them will side with the older fans. The argument is unlikely to be resolved. The lesson, if there is one, is something subtler than either side has been willing to articulate during the long dispute. The lesson is that a network that decides not to give an audience the show they want is making a defensible decision. The same network deciding to mock the audience for wanting the show is making a separate, harder to defend decision. Both decisions can be made by the same room. Both decisions, when made together, produce a particular kind of resentment that does not fade. The original Teen Titans audience has not let go because being told to let go repeatedly on screen by a show that has taken your show's slot is not a request that creates the conditions for letting go. It creates the opposite. It creates a wound that reopens every time the show, in syndication, plays one of the Hater episodes. 12 years on, the syndication continues. The wound continues. The producers, who are now in Hollywood directing animated films about plumbers and princesses, are unlikely to ever return to the question of whether the strategy was worth the long-term cost to a portion of the audience. The strategy paid out, the cost was paid by someone else. If you have followed this story to the end, you have seen the shape of an argument that no longer has a referee. The original audience aged out of the network's target demographic. The new audience aged into it. The show that the original audience hated became the show that the new audience grew up with, and the network, in the meantime, was sold, restructured, and sold again under the Warner Bros. Discovery merger of 2022. Cartoon Network, as an independent creative brand, no longer exists in the form that produced the original Teen Titans. The studio that produces Teen Titans Go is part of a larger media conglomerate whose strategy across animation has been to consolidate, license, and extend its existing intellectual property, rather than to develop new projects. In that environment, the show is more valuable than ever. It is a known property with 12 years of catalog, reliable ratings, and a built-in audience of young viewers who are aging into nostalgia for it. There is, from the studio's perspective, no reason to ever stop making it. The audience the show began by mocking is, in the long view, going to outlive the show. They have lived with the resentment for 12 years, and they will in all likelihood live with it for another 12. The original Teen Titans will, at some point, become available on a streaming service that allows the older audience to rewatch it without watching the show that displaced it. Some of those original show fans will pass the show on to their own children. Some will not. The argument about what the new show did to the old show will keep getting made. In fan community posts, and in long-form video essays, and in conversations between siblings who grew up watching different versions of the same characters. The producers who are now directing Mario films are unlikely to participate in those conversations. The original cast, several of whom voice the same characters in both shows, are unlikely to participate either. The conversation is yours in the end, and the network's role in it has been only to keep airing the show, every day, every hour, until the audience that hated it, simply by aging, ages out. What it leaves behind is a show that has now been on the air for almost as long as the children watching it have been alive, and a community of viewers who watched the show that came before this one, who never got the ending they were promised, and who have spent the better part of 2 decades being told in increasingly direct ways by the show that took the slot that they should have outgrown all of this by now. If something in this video meant something to you, subscribing helps more than you would expect. Sleep well, take care of yourself. The next one is already on the way.